US battles a surge of COVID-19 cases as Donald Trump talks down the pandemic to talk up the economy.
If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression.
Anger at new restrictions as European leaders deal with a dramatic rise in coronavirus cases. Heartfelt reunions for some, but as Kiwis take flight across Australia, the New Zealand travel bubble angers 4 state premiers. Defiant and determined, thousands of anti-government protesters swarm the streets of Bangkok.
This is SBS World News with Darren Mara.
Good evening. Coronavirus cases are surging to new levels in the United States, despite President Donald Trump's latest attempts to downplay the situation. Well, just 15 days from the election, the US president has talked up not always listening to scientists during the COVID response, while Twitter has removed a post by a senior White House official who had claimed masks don't work. More than 8.1 million Americans have now been infected with COVID, 380,000 new cases in the past week alone. Its death toll will soon surpass 220,000.
At a church service in glitzy Las Vegas,
We bless you, President Trump.
President Trump given a premonition of divine intervention of the electoral kind.
At 4:30, the Lord said to me, I am going to give your president a second win. And you will be the president again.
A maskless president trying to flip the state of Nevada, spruiking the state of the economy at a typically packed rally.
The pandemic is rounding the turn. If I listened totally to the scientists, we would right now have a country that would be in a massive depression. Instead of, we're like a rocket ship. Take a look at the numbers.
But his critics say the only thing skyrocketing in the US are the COVID case numbers, now averaging 55,000 a day, a 60% jump since September. 48 states reporting an uptick of infections.
Turn the corner. Things are getting worse. He continues to lie to us about the circumstances.
The Trump administration's coronavirus messaging taking another hit. Twitter removing a post by senior COVID advisor Dr. Scott Atlas for falsely claiming masks don't work to stop the spread. The White House, in the meantime, has reportedly gagged top coronavirus expert Dr. Anthony Fauci. In one of the few interviews he's been allowed to take part in, he's claimed that his media appearances have been restricted. Dr. Fauci likely to draw further ire for his critique of this ceremony for Supreme Court pick Amy Coney Barrett, after which 36 White House staffers, including the president, contracted COVID.
Were you surprised that President Trump got sick?
Absolutely not. I was worried that he was going to get sick when I saw him in a completely precarious situation. When I saw that on TV, I said, oh my goodness, nothing good can come out of that.
Michigan's governor fearing the same after this moment yesterday.
Lock them all up.
President Trump accused of escalating violent rhetoric against Gretchen Whitmer, the target of a foiled plot allegedly by right-wing extremists to kidnap and execute her.
10 days after that was uncovered, the president is at it again and inspiring and incentivizing and inciting this kind of domestic terrorism. It is wrong.
The president's daughter-in-law dismissive.
Well, look, he wasn't doing anything, I don't think, to provoke people to threaten this woman at all. He was having fun.
Joe Biden, during his drive-in rally in North Carolina, reminding voters of this moment in Charlottesville 3 years ago.
We should have no tolerance for extremist white supremacist group marching and menacing our communities.
The former vice president and now election frontrunner describing the election as a battle to save America's soul. Omer Dehan, SBS World News.
And later, our chief international correspondent, Ben Lewis, meets key voters in the battleground state of Florida. Could the Village, a retirement community labelled America's friendliest hometown, give a clue as to who will win the White House? That story coming up. But first, European countries are battling with a spike in coronavirus cases as anti-lockdown protesters are venting their frustrations at their loss of freedoms. Italy has recorded its highest daily number of new cases since the pandemic began, and even some countries which had previously fared well are now seeing an upsurge in infections.
It began peacefully enough, hundreds filling Prague's Old Town Square, defying a ban on public gatherings. But this protest against COVID-19 restrictions soon shifted gears. Riot police and officers on horseback deployed to disperse protesters. There's been a steady rise in cases in Czech Republic and Slovakia. Czech residents will know within a fortnight whether they'll be forced into a full lockdown. Mass protests on the streets of the Slovakian capital as the government there plans to use the military to undertake a mass testing of everyone aged over 10. The Italian Prime Minister announcing his country will do all it can to avoid another general lockdown.
The country cannot allow itself to come to another stop, which would severely compromise the entire economy.
As Italy recorded more than 11,700 new daily cases, Giuseppe Conte is giving mayors the power to close public areas after 9 p.m. But he stopped short of imposing a curfew. Bars and restaurants can stay open until midnight, table service only after 6 p.m. For school children, starting times will be staggered and amateur contact sports are cancelled. The new restrictions come as prayers were offered for the 179 Italian doctors who've died from coronavirus. They were commemorated during a mass in Lombardy in the north of the country, the region worst affected during the first wave.
We are gathered together to remember the doctors who have lost their lives and their loved ones as they faced an unforeseen virus that suddenly and unexpectedly invaded the world.
A virus that shows no sign of leaving as suddenly as it invaded. Felicity Davey, SBS World News.
State premiers have blamed the federal government for shirking responsibility over the Trans-Tasman bubble arrangement after dozens of New Zealanders unexpectedly arrived over the weekend. Leaders from Victoria, Western Australia, Tasmania and South Australia say they're angry. But the federal government says it's up to them to enforce domestic borders.
A reunion 7 months in the making.
Relief, absolute relief. It's been so long.
The distance caused by COVID not enough to stop this couple from getting engaged.
We've got engaged in the time we've been apart, so yeah.
Haven't told the family.
Oh dear.
As New Zealanders take advantage of the Trans-Tasman bubble, the message upon arrival clear for these travellers.
It was explained really well. It was quite easy.
Very clear of what we need to do. Don't leave New South Wales.
Though it doesn't appear that clear for the states.
Despite the fact that we didn't want to be in the bubble, it seems like the bubble applies to every part of our country.
As Victoria's Premier confirmed, 65 New Zealanders have now made it into the state without its knowing. Despite that, they won't have to self-quarantine. The federal government is pointing the finger back to the Premier.
Having set foot into Sydney, past the international border into Australian territory, then it's obviously up to state governments.
It is completely unreasonable to be putting it to me that somehow it's my fault or the Victorian government's fault.
Last time I looked, our international borders, the national government was in charge of it.
The Australian Border Force boss telling Senate estimates Victoria was on board from the start.
Clearly, the operational level at least, the Victorian services were recognised what was happening and no objections were raised.
New South Wales also defending its role.
It is a little confusing, but I'll just say that from our point of view, New South Wales, I want to emphasise New South Wales Health
and Border Force have done everything that we were asked to do.
The first stage of the Trans-Tasman bubble was only meant to start with New South Wales and the Northern Territory. But now it's not just Victoria that's entered unwillingly, with other states including Western Australia, Tasmania and South Australia.
Western Australia did not sign up to and did not agree with the one-way travel bubble put in place by the federal government.
23 now forced to quarantine in WA, South Australia and Tasmania each have 5.
If you travel to Tasmania via another jurisdiction, you will be required to enter 14 days of mandatory quarantine.
They made the declaration and then they moved straight into hotel quarantine.
The issue now likely to be discussed at National Cabinet on Friday. Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
Thai lawmakers are expected to meet to discuss recalling Parliament as anti-government protesters step up demands for the removal of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and reform of the monarchy. Parliament was not due to return until the beginning of next month, but protesters are continuing to defy a ban on demonstrations. Any extraordinary session would need the approval of the King.
At first it was just a few hundred, but soon it was thousands, transforming this key intersection from this to this. Before long, a sea of protesters had gathered at Bangkok's Victory Monument and other transport hubs, defying government orders to stay home, handing out goggles, raincoats and umbrellas to take on tear gas, water cannon and rubber bullets. On Sunday, police warned that simply posting a selfie from the protests could lead to 2 years in prison. It hasn't deterred the protesters.
If we are together, we have chance more to win. But if we let people fight alone, there will be less chance to win.
Each day, the authorities detain more protest leaders. Each day, new ones come forward. A social media savvy generation inspired by protests such as those in Hong Kong. Their catch cry is to be like water, to keep on the move, to stay fluid. They've developed their own system of hand signals to warn of danger, call for help, or relay that the situation is safe.
The most important signal is this. This means we have to go home, we have to run. This is danger.
On Sunday, the police kept a low profile, but at the back of everyone's mind is this. Thailand is no stranger to violent crackdowns, most recently in 2010, when dozens of demonstrators were killed. For now, the government is holding out the prospect of talks. But with the protests spreading to the provinces, the question is for how long? Mick Wells, SBS World News.
Well, coming up next, get ready for Christmas. 2 states announced plans to further ease coronavirus restrictions. Je suis Samuel. Thousands paid tribute to the French teacher murdered for showing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in class. Plus,
don't worry, loud and clear, only RM Williams.
An iconic brand back in Australian hands, and why movie star Hugh Jackman is celebrating.
Tonight at 7:35, renovations of Regal Homes in the new season of Great House Revival. Then at 8:30, 24 hours in emergency. And later, 8 out of 10 kids does countdown.
Are you leaving the money to your children? Yes. All of them?
Where there's a will, there can be a problem.
People would see easy money.
I'm going to get you when I die. Then on Dateline, the cruise ship, coronavirus, and the heartbreaking conclusion.
I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't.
How did it all go so horribly wrong? And on the feed, can supplements slow aging? That's tomorrow on SBS and on demand.
Value tastes better when it's freshly made. Subway 6-inch subs. All this for only $5 with the Everyday Value range. All day, every day at Subway.
I return to Yankee Land to carry out secret mission. Where is everybody?
Everybody's inside so they don't spread this virus.
There's a virus. I'm killing some of the virus.
If you think you see a virus go like that,
You do that, and I get...
Hell yeah.
Sorry, my daughter escaped from the crate and followed me. Teenagers.
Receive a bonus Woolworths e-gift card worth up to $300 with selected cooking appliances, fridges, dishwashers, wine cabinets and laundry appliances right now at Binglee.
Say that again.
Right now at Binglee.
Core of my heart. My country. Land of the rainbow gold. For flood and fire and famine. She pays us back threefold. Over the thirsty paddocks, watch, after many days, the filmy veil of greenness that thickens as we gaze.
One of the great gifts of being a teacher is seeing a child have an aha moment.
Seeing the impact that such diverse learning has on my students.
SBS Learn allows me to energise my students and challenge my students.
I think personal stories make a difference.
As a former refugee and as a teacher, it's so important that students see themselves in resources so that they know that Australia acknowledges them.
So that they know that their culture matters.
Providing students with a sense of belonging, that's what makes all the difference.
I never sought out to be a drug addict. I don't look like a drug addict, so I've been told.
I started drinking when I was 13 and I'm now 62.
I don't think I could wear short sleeves ever again.
I don't want to wake up one day and have nothing left. No belongings, no soul.
Addicted Australia starts Tuesday 10th of November on SBS and on demand.
The federal-state political row over Victoria's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified, with the Treasurer accusing Daniel Andrews of bloody-mindedness for his cautious moves out of lockdown. The Premier has hit back, saying Josh Frydenberg does nothing but play politics. Australia continues to record COVID cases, the largest outbreak today on a ship docked at Fremantle in Western Australia. While in Victoria, one person has died, as the state recorded 4 cases.
With the salons of Melbourne throwing open their doors, hairdresser Connie Kazaris lost no time in getting her own locks tended to.
I got the call last night and I said, I'll see you in the morning. I'm there. So yeah, it's great. I'm really, really ecstatic, very, very happy and excited.
Some respite for lockdown Victorians in the latest easing of restrictions, with rounds of golf, haircuts and tennis back on. But no let-up, though, in the increasingly bitter verbal political rallies.
There's been a callous indifference by the Victorian government to the loss of jobs in the state. The bloody-mindedness is unforgivable.
It's all about the politics with this bloke, isn't it? That's all he does. That's all he does. He's not a leader, he's just a Liberal. He's just a Liberal, and all he does is play politics every day. It doesn't keep anyone safe and it doesn't get the numbers down.
And those COVID-19 numbers are coming down. Active cases continuing their decline, with just 12 coronavirus patients in hospital, none requiring intensive care. The nursing home death of a man in his 90s, bringing the state's toll to 817. 4 new infections had the rolling new case average in Melbourne now sitting at just over 7. 0.5 in regional Victoria. There have been 15 cases from an unknown transmission source in the fortnight to the 16th of October. The daily numbers remain the key to the further lifting of restrictions, with the prospect of the scheduled retail and hospitality reopening in a fortnight being brought forward if the positive case trends continue this week. While business owners, particularly in the deserted CBD, are excited to return, they say they still face major challenges ahead.
It is not going to be over. We won't be that jubilant because it's going to take a long time for us to recover.
Hoping for at least a sniff of better times as the road out of lockdown gets longer by the day. Gareth Boreham, SBS World News.
People tested as part of Victoria's botched hotel quarantine program may have been exposed to blood-borne viruses such as hepatitis B and C and HIV. Single-use devices for blood glucose tests were inadvertently used on multiple returned residents, presenting a risk of virus infections from cross-contamination. Safer Care Victoria says 243 people in the quarantine program tested between March 29 and August 20 are being contacted to undergo precautionary screening for infection. New South Wales and Tasmania, meanwhile, have announced plans to roll back some restrictions. The announcement comes as the Australian Medical Association called for all jurisdictions to come together, warning mixed messaging is doing harm.
Just in time for the all-important Christmas lead-up, New South Wales weddings and corporate parties are back on. 300 people can gather for weddings indoors and out from December 1.
This is good news to allow people to prepare for Christmas and the celebrations over summer. Interestingly, the health experts agree and have given us advice that it could actually be safer to go to a restaurant.
For the hospitality industry, it's a step forward in a year that hit casual staff hardest.
They've been literally on the poverty line to the point of begging for food and money because there was no employment for them. So this is a good glimmer of hope for them. It's a step in the direction where we can start hiring them again.
And as of this weekend, New South Wales indoor restaurant and pub bookings will triple, with 30 people allowed to meet indoors and out. New South Wales Health again calling for more testing, eyeing a cluster in southwest Sydney.
We are concerned that there are transmission chains that are undetected, particularly in southwestern Sydney and western Sydney.
Tasmania keeping close watch too, waiting a week to decide whether to open its borders to New South Wales from November 2nd.
If the situation changes in New South Wales, if it worsens, we won't hesitate to keep our borders restricted with that state.
Western Australia has recorded 24 positive cases of COVID aboard a ship that arrived in Fremantle overnight.
Obviously, these test results are only at one point in time. So it is possible we could get further positive results in coming days.
As state and territories deal with different issues, doctors say leaders need to get on the same page. The AMA wants a rewrite on the national roadmap out of COVID-19 restrictions.
The roadmap sort of assumes that we're all going to be able to get it to a level where we pretty much be able to go back to normal life. And I think we will ask the Australian community to understand that I don't think that's going to happen.
It's been a particularly tough year for the class of 2020, with a new study revealing 40% are struggling with mental health issues. Now Drinkwise has launched a national campaign with high-profile Australians offering support to Year 12s, a day before many do their HSC, reminding them they aren't alone and a tough year can be overcome. Camille Bianchi, SBS World News.
Israel has started to ease its second nationwide coronavirus lockdown, the country seeing a steady decline in daily infections. The Health Ministry will begin drafting guidelines to reopen holy sites in Jerusalem's Old City to small groups. But much of the economy will remain closed, with only nursery schools, kindergartens and businesses that don't offer customer service to reopen. Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat has been rushed to a hospital in Israel from his home in the West Bank for treatment for a worsening case of COVID-19. He's in a serious but stable condition, but there is concern over his increased vulnerability to the virus as he underwent a lung transplant 3 years ago. And the man behind one of Indonesia's most famous politically motivated assassinations has also died from coronavirus. Polikarpus Prianto was sentenced to 14 years in prison for his role in the killing of human rights activist Munir Talib on a Garuda Indonesia airline flight in 2004. Prianto was the pilot during the flight from Jakarta to Singapore, where Talib was poisoned. A top public servant has conceded staff within his department may have tried to cover up a Western Sydney airport deal which saw taxpayers pay 10 times the value of the land. Infrastructure Department boss Simon Atkinson says there are currently 4 separate investigations into the 2018 land purchase.
The controversial land deal in Western Sydney back in the spotlight. A fortnight of budget estimates kicked off by this damning admission.
But worse, what it looks like is people tried to cover it up when the audit office came asking questions.
Senator, I agree with you. I'm trying to clean it up.
The AFP investigating the deal which saw the federal government purchase the Leppington Triangle for $30 million, when, according to the audit office, it was only valued at $3 million.
This is what you pay. Every other column there is what the valuation said. Somebody worked pretty hard to get it high, didn't they?
The Deputy Prime Minister called it a bargain 3 weeks ago.
When there is and needing to be more runways and more infrastructure built at Western Sydney Airport, they'll look back and they'll say, probably, what a bargain that was.
The head of the Infrastructure Department today contradicting that assessment.
Is there anything that supports the Deputy Prime Minister's assertion that this is a good investment?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Mr Atkinson also revealing there are 4 separate investigations into the land deal underway and 2 staff members are being investigated. This as the rough and tumble of politics continues. Labor promising to lift the maximum childcare subsidy to 90%, cutting costs for 97% of families by up to $2,900 a year, taking its $6.2 billion childcare overhaul to the next election.
It is win for children, it's win for families, and it's a win for the economy.
It's also economic reform. And what was really missing from Scott Morrison's budget was any economic reform whatsoever.
The start of the parliamentary sitting fortnight has begun with a win for the government, passing its higher education reforms today. Over the next 2 weeks, a number of budget measures will be on the agenda, including the JobMaker wage subsidy scheme. The government keen to keep its focus on its road to economic recovery.
Australians know they can trust the government when it comes to managing the economy, Mr Speaker. They know they can trust the government when we say we want to ensure people keep more of what they earn.
Shubha Krishnan, SBS World News.
Indigenous workers have filed a class action against the Western Australian government to recover their unpaid wages. A warning: this clip may show Indigenous people who have died. Survivors and relatives of those who were forced to work in jobs such as stockmen, farmhands and domestic workers during the 19th and 20th century allege their wages were held by the state government in trust accounts but were never released. They're now seeking compensation.
A sense of responsibility on the part of the government for that wrongdoing, and a recognition that these Indigenous Western Australians worked hard like all other Western Australians, and that they were denied their rightful entitlement of effectively a fair day's wage for a fair day's work.
The state government says it aims to settle the case through mediation. The United Nations has urged Armenia and Azerbaijan to honour the terms of a humanitarian ceasefire which took effect over the weekend. It follows reports of casualties and attacks within hours of the deal coming into place. The conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, which is internationally regarded as part of Azerbaijan but populated mainly by Armenians, has entered its 3rd week. Each side has accused the other of breaking the truce first.
Tanks firing and forces advancing. Azerbaijan's Ministry of Defence has shared this video, which it says depicts its military forces seizing Armenian positions. A ceasefire agreement brokered by Moscow that came into effect yesterday morning has meant little on the ground. Today, Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh's capital, Stepanakert, buried one of their own soldiers. They say he was killed in a mortar attack just hours after the peace agreement came into effect.
We are praying for our guys, we are fighting for our land, and we will prevail.
Azerbaijan denying responsibility for the attack, which also saw a mortar rip through the roof of this cathedral in the nearby town of Shusha.
They have shelled the House of Culture, shelled the mosque, shelled the Christian church, shelled houses. They are firing and are saying that it is a ceasefire. Where is the ceasefire?
Internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh has been under the control of ethnic Armenian forces since 1994. Last month's revival of the violence has already claimed at least 750 lives. This is the second ceasefire to be put in place after an initial one brokered by Moscow last week failed. The city of Ganja in western Azerbaijan also coming under attack hours before yesterday's deal. 13 people were killed. Locals there still sifting through the destruction and mourning their dead.
We should fight until the end. We are behind the president. We believe in our country. We believe in our army. We believe in our people. Let there be war and let us liberate our territories.
Gulieva lost her home and her nephew was critically injured in that attack. Like many Azerbaijanis, she's not interested in a ceasefire. Dom Vukovic, SBS World News.
Tens of thousands have marched in Belarus to demand the resignation of veteran President Alexander Lukashenko. The marches in the capital of Minsk have been occurring weekly despite a threat by officials to use firearms against protesters. 2 churches have been set on fire in Santiago as thousands of Chileans commemorated the first anniversary since deadly demonstrations began. The protests were sparked by students last year over an increase in subway fares. It's since turned into a broader list of demands over inequality, leading to a plebiscite, which will be held this weekend. A landslide in central Vietnam has crashed into an army camp at the foot of a mountain in Quang Tri province, burying at least 22 army personnel. 3 bodies have been retrieved as about 100 rescuers dug through the mud for the missing. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets around France in tribute to a Paris history teacher who was beheaded after discussing caricatures of the Islamic prophet Muhammad with his class. His 18-year-old attacker was shot dead by French authorities, who say they've now arrested another 11 people in connection with the murder.
Once again, around the figure of Marianne, a sea of defiance. This statue, this square, a homing point for a nation whose values have come under attack. Since his death on Friday, Samuel Paty, like others before him, has become a symbol of France itself.
It's important to be here today for this, to show our collective strength, because that's what can help us follow our principles during tough times.
We're here to defend the values of the Republic: liberty, equality, fraternity and secularism. The government is too inactive. Something must be done.
The Prime Minister, Jean Castex, arrived in Place de la République in a mask printed with the French flag. His message on Twitter today read, "You won't scare us, we're France." The newest slogan on posters here, "I am Samuel," or simply, "I am a teacher," an echo of the rallying cry sparked by the attacks on Charlie Hebdo 5 years ago. This sombre rally is a show of unity in the wake of Samuel Paty's death, but it's also proof of the power of social media to deliver a message and bring people together. The same power that enabled a one-man campaign against a local teacher to spiral out of control. Samuel Paty was killed by a man who knew him only through social media, the result of an online campaign launched by an outraged parent that spread quickly outside Conflans. Across France, tens of thousands of people have joined the rallies in his name. A man who stood for the values of the nation, remembered today by a nation standing with him.
In the US now, and the race for the White House could be won on the seniors' vote. They're a crucial demographic, particularly in the battleground state of Florida. But these once reliable Republican voters may be shifting towards the Democratic nominee Joe Biden. So Donald Trump may be in trouble. And it could come down to communities like the Villages. In the 2016 election, Trump won here almost 2-1. But as our chief international correspondent Ben Lewis reports, even here, Biden is getting a foothold.
If Florida is America's retirement home, the Villages is its capital. A planned community for seniors that looks like a movie set. Residents cruising perfectly manicured streets on golf carts, the preferred mode of transportation. Most are retired, the vast majority are white. It's very much Trump country, making this convoy an unusual sight. These seniors are riding with Biden, the Democratic resistance in a conservative stronghold, no longer afraid to speak their minds. Behind the demonstration, a former Republican who moved here with her husband a year ago.
We were very welcomed and we were invited to parties. And then once people saw our Facebook pages, we were ostracized. We weren't invited anymore. I mean, that's how it is.
That's sad, isn't it?
It is sad. It's very sad, yeah. And, you know, we thought and it's like I just don't understand it, you know. I've never been political before. I've never demonstrated before. I've never been so scared for America before.
The normally peaceful atmosphere in the villages has changed in recent months. This incident made global headlines.
White power! Yes, there you go, white power. You hear that?
The video shared by the president on Twitter. Biden supporters were appalled.
Inside, I'd like to rip every sign away. Outside, ignore them. I won't even look at them because I don't want to give them the energy.
And so they try to take the high road as they roll around town.
Despite this show of support, Joe Biden isn't going to win the villages, but it's a very different situation statewide. In 2016, Donald Trump enjoyed a 17-point advantage with elderly voters in Florida. This time around, though, polls suggest he's tied with the Democrat.
It's why Republicans have had to up their ground game here. If the election was decided on noise alone, it would be a landslide win for Trump.
Save our retirement.
But the president has a pandemic problem. COVID-19 has claimed nearly 16,000 lives in Florida. Most of the victims have been elderly. The administration's response has infuriated many.
Oh, it's terrible. And the lies and misconceptions are damaging to the country as a whole.
Polls show the issue has cost Trump votes, yet many of his fans refuse to blame him.
Who do you think could have done it better? I think he's a miracle man.
Local Republican officials are not trying to focus on the pandemic. Instead, they're asking residents who they trust to keep the stock market soaring.
Most of us are living off of retirement plans that we were able to develop over our working lifetime. And a lot of that is still invested in the market. It's really important to seniors that the economy is doing well. And on all those things, I think the president gives very high marks.
Hey, Mr. President.
Politics in Florida is always colourful.
I've taken over 4,000 pictures with people over the past 5 years.
And election results are always close. These seniors moved here to relax and enjoy their retirement. But until November 3rd, they're pedal to the metal, chasing down every last vote. In the villages, Ben Lewis, SBS World News.
Iconic bootmaker RM Williams is being returned to Australian ownership after the company was bought by mining magnate Andrew Twiggy Forrest. The purchase is being hailed as a win for local jobs and manufacturing.
Stepping back onto home soil. Iconic bootmaker RM Williams, now under Australian ownership for the first time since 2014. The 88-year-old company bought back from a private US equity firm for a reported $190 million, well below last year's initial asking price of up to $500 million. The proud new owners, West Australian billionaire Andrew Twiggy Forrest and his wife Nicola.
So I just want to see this organisation grow and grow with Australian craftsmanship, Australian quality, Australian reputation and back in Australian hands.
As for most retailers, it was a grim start to the year for RM Williams, which closed all of its Australian stores due to coronavirus lockdowns. But the company is back on its feet. Shop fronts have since reopened, while the return to Australian ownership is welcome news for the manufacturing sector. There are 900 RM Williams staff based in Australia, including 400 employees at its workshop in Adelaide, where the company was first established in 1932. The South Australian Premier hoping it could create more jobs.
It'd also be great to look at some ways that we can increase the visitation and the tourism opportunities associated with RM Williams. What an iconic Australian brand.
Locals keen to throw their support behind one of the country's best-known brands.
When I learned last night that RM is now owned by Australian again, and this morning I can't stop myself to come and get a few pieces.
Some visitors now assured the boots are authentically Australian, considering buying a pair.
And now that it's being owned locally, definitely. Been here 3.5 years, so it would be nice to have something Australian.
Don't worry, loud and clear, only RM Williams.
Film star Hugh Jackman, who took a small stake in the company in 2015, will receive a $10 million payout. The Australian will remain on board as brand ambassador.
When I say I'm in, I am all in.
Abby O'Brien, SBS World News.
Well, China has stepped up its recovery from the COVID-19 downturn, and SBS reporter Catalina Flores joins me now for more. Catalina, it comes as Beijing prepares to unveil an economic blueprint next week.
That's right, Darren. The world's second largest economy has now regained all the ground it lost during its strict lockdowns after GDP grew by 2.7% in the September quarter and 4.9% on an annualised basis. While that was slightly below expectations, it means China's economy has grown 0.7% since the start of the year. The IMF is forecasting China to be the only major economy to grow in 2020. And separate data also released today signals continued strength, with industrial production and retail sales both rising while unemployment fell.
It's probably not the retrospective GDP figures to look at in China, it's the industrial production, and they beat expectations. So industrial production is, Chinese output. It really does give you that chance. 6.3% year-on-year growth. They are clearly stimulating themselves. When in doubt, spend your way out. That's what China's motto has been for almost 4 decades now. And you can see that in that industrial production. It also came home in retail sales.
Chinese leaders will gather in Beijing next week to unveil a new 5-year economic plan. While those weaker than expected GDP figures dampened China's share market, Australian shares have risen to a 7.5-month high, with the ASX 200 now sitting where it was in mid-March on renewed hopes of a US stimulus package ahead of next month's presidential election. Every sector finished higher, led by healthcare and technology. The banks all rose. Crown Resorts dived more than 8%. One Australian dollar is buying 70.8 US cents and is weaker against a basket of other major currencies. Well, Australia, Japan and India have agreed to develop a supply chain resilience program aiming to counter China's dominance in the region. India hopes to be a major beneficiary as it looks to attract companies away from China, but the new initiative is also likely to boost trade between Japan and Australia.
This chain restaurant in Tokyo has a unique twist on steak dinners.
We wanted to make steak a luxury meal more accessible for our Japanese customers. By having them stand while they eat, we can speed up the flow of customers.
Ikinari steak, which translates to suddenly steak, is a staple in Japan, with over 350 restaurants nationwide. In 2018, one of its Tokyo branches broke the Guinness World Record for serving the most beef steaks in 24 hours. Every month, the chain imports about 50 tons of Australian beef.
We use Australian beef for fillet steak. It's very popular. Our customers say it's tender and easy to eat.
Japanese businesses like Ikinari Steak are keeping a close eye as Japan, Australia, and India discuss a new initiative for supply chain resilience. It comes amid a growing recognition of the country's excessive economic reliance on China. Businesses in the region faced a rude awakening earlier this year when Beijing shut its doors due to its initial outbreak of COVID-19. The global supply chain came to a halt.
These 3 countries are trying to spearhead an effort to build an alternative supply chain network that ensures that supply chains remain functioning if there is another kind of shock to the global supply chains.
For more than 2 decades, Japan was the largest export destination for Australian beef, until it was overtaken by China in 2019. Experts say the initiative will likely result in Australia supplying more products like meat to the Indo-Pacific region, which would help create the groundwork for building supply chain infrastructure.
And with an economy like Australia that is really its prosperity is based on the export of resources, that I think that this deleverages Australia's economy a little bit from the Chinese economy. It makes it more flexible and more dynamic and gives it other economic opportunities in the region.
Australian entrepreneurs with businesses in Japan are also keen to see what the new initiative might mean for them. N2 Brunch Club in Tokyo was launched by 2 Aussies in 2018 who say it was initially a struggle to find suppliers for Australian goods.
We did get a bit of help from a few government organisations Australian government organisations in Japan, from the embassy, which was very helpful. Just finding suppliers that bring in Aussie products, because we kept hitting hurdles with Aussie products. Japanese are very big on their labels and their nutritions and everything. So that did help us a lot.
The supply chain initiative will be launched next year. In Tokyo, Grace Lee, SBS World News.
The Financial Crimes Regulator is investigating Crown Resorts over potential breaches of anti-money laundering laws at its Melbourne casino. In a statement, Crown says AUSTRAC has concern around customer due diligence and compliance with an anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing program. It follows a compliance assessment that began in September 2019 on Crown's management of customers identified as high risk, likely focusing on high rollers flown in by private junket operators. The company is already the subject of an inquiry in New South Wales into its fitness to hold a gaming licence. Renewed share market volatility during September has weighed on super returns, erasing 0.6% from the median growth fund, the first negative monthly result since March. That's pushed returns over the past 12 months back into negative territory, but a longer 7-year view shows returns remain above 7%.
We did see the benefits of diversification come to the fore, just as they did in March earlier this year. So in September, even though share markets were down between 3 and 3.5%, by being well diversified across a wide range of asset classes, the median growth fund was able to limit the damage to a small loss of negative 0.6.
Chant West says strong market momentum in October has seen the growth fund add around 2.5% so far this month. But, of course, investors will be focusing on the US presidential election, which is only 2 weeks away, Darren.
Thanks, Catalina. Coming up next, back on the ropes. One daredevil sets a new world record and Northern exposure. The build-up to AFL's All-Victorian Grand Final gets underway in Queensland.
These houses have seen better days.
That's just rotten.
But hope is just around the corners. From bland to grand.
Wonderful.
From dilapidating to fascinating.
Bit of a transformation.
From deprived to revived.
The journey you've taken is just amazing.
The Great House Revival starts tonight 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
Uncover the truth behind Latin America's greatest empires. Rise of Empires starts Sunday 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
New tortilla pockets are ready for takeoff. And we are gone!
Launching to mess-free Mexican with new tortilla pockets from all El Paso.
When you switch your home loan to a great low rate with Newcastle Permanent, we'll give you $2,000 cash back. That's your money to spend on whatever you want. So come see how much you could save. Newcastle Permanent, here for you and here for good.
You remember I'm picking Bex up from school, right?
The JCR's due Friday, so which font should we use?
Are you going to video chat this weekend? Your dad and I'd love to see the kid.
He's in.
So can we go outside?
We could go to this place after.
The all-new Nissan Juke, featuring Apple CarPlay. Let's improvise.
Get your Woolies worth for the footy finals with prices dropped on game day faves, like Jumbo Bread Roll Variety 6-pack, now just $2.70.
That's why I pick Woolies.
Wednesday, the fight for equality in the air.
We took on the big boys.
Plus, some hidden histories.
What happens in the air stays in the air till now.
Australia, come fly with me. Wednesday, 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
This is America. Either you're somebody or you're nobody.
Take a walk on the wild side with an epic fortnight of gangster movies.
A me nessuno mi compete di vendicare a me.
Gangster Week, Part 1. Starts tonight, 9:30 on SBS World Movies.
Well, a world record has been set in the German city of Nuremberg with a slackline walker crossing the city's stadium at a dizzying height of 73 metres. Jens Decker walked 230 metres from floodlight to floodlight, setting the world record for the longest high-line walk in a stadium. AFL chief Gil McLachlan has confirmed a crowd of 30,000 has been approved for this weekend's season decider between Richmond and Geelong in Brisbane. The AFL launched its grand final week in unfamiliar territory today on the back of its virtual Brownlow medal ceremony last night.
The AFL trophy hasn't been this far north since the Brisbane Lions completed a premiership three-peat in 2003. Unveiled ahead of a new-look showpiece that retains a distinctly Victorian flavour.
First grand final outside Victoria, two historic Victorian clubs, great football teams. I think you actually couldn't hope for anything more.
Gil and McLachlan dismissing any suggestion 2020's title race has been tainted by disruption, paying tribute to the game's resilience after achieving grassroots growth despite the pandemic.
You can't imagine we'd be standing here a day like today when we were looking into the abyss of March and April. Even with COVID, it's the record number of junior clubs ever in Queensland. I'm really confident that's going to translate into growth at community level.
2020 adding to the AFL's already successful long-term Queensland strategy.
We have seen over the last 5 years a 500% increase in the number of girls playing AFL here in Queensland alone.
Brisbane's Gabba hosted almost 30,000 for Geelong's preliminary final win on Saturday. Lions star Lachie Neale returning to the scene late last night, celebrating his Brownlow medal win with a quiet victory lap. AFL's Night of Nights going largely virtual. Neale forced to award the medal to himself after earning 31 votes from 17 games. Finishing 10 votes clear, the biggest gap between first and second place in Brownlow history. Richmond star Bashar Hurley was recognised for his foundation's work, which includes broad engagement with Melbourne's Muslim community. Joel Spreadborough, SBS World News.
The 2021 Supercars Championship opener has been relocated from South Australia to New South Wales, with the iconic Mount Panorama Circuit tipped to be the venue. New Zealand driver Shane van Gisbergen celebrated his season-ending Bathurst 1000 win today. Now, reports are linking the famous venue to the revised start of next year's championship in mid to late February. Supercars officials confirming the traditional Adelaide 500 opener will be rescheduled due to the tourism impact of coronavirus. Coming up next, the weather and Australia's most inclusive workplaces, recognising employers who make a positive impact.
I actually can't believe it's all come together.
Every renovator's dream begins as a nightmare.
Look at the state of the whole thing.
The Great House Revival starts next on SBS.
The longer Donald Trump is president, the more reckless he seems to get.
Suburban women, will you please like me?
When America votes,
here we are.
The world watches. The final presidential debate. SBS World News, Friday at midday.
The new i30 has a 10.25-inch screen for navigation, which when you think about it means it's connected to a network of satellites in space. That's right, space. The new i30, remarkable.
They're on their way. You making a pizza?
No, I'm making the love.
What?
Oh.
Hey, want a lift? We can take the boats.
That's all right. Mum's just had her SUV service.
Mum's just had a cap price service.
Mum's got roadside assist, though.
Oh yeah, Mum says lifetime roadside assist.
Mum's got a bit more muscle, so...
Can your mum pull 3.5 tonnes, Simon?
Oh, hi, Mrs. Andrews. Oh, nice rig, Mrs. Andrews.
Want a lift?
Yeah. I'm in. I'm in.
Come on, muscles.
If you're serious about buying a property, and not just tapping on walls, the first place you should start is ANZ Buy Ready. You'll know how much a property could sell for And you can start your home loan pre-approval application in just 5 minutes. So you're ready to make your move. Get on top of property buying with ANZ Buy Ready.
Beautiful, aren't they? They're migrating to Aldi. They get their fresh stuff from the same place as other supermarkets.
Barbados.
No, son. Australia.
Aussie fruit, veg and meat at Aldi prices. That's good different.
As a Lexus Encore member, we'll loan you a car when we're servicing yours and invite you to exclusive events, giving you the luxury of time. Welcome to Lexus Encore, our owner benefits program.
Are you leaving the money to your children? Yes, all of them.
Where there's a will, there can be a problem.
People would see easy money.
I'm going to get you when I die.
Then on Dateline, the cruise ship, coronavirus, and the heartbreaking conclusion.
I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't.
How did it all go so horribly wrong? And on the feed, can supplements slow ageing? That's tomorrow on SBS and On Demand.
To the weather now, and a frontal system and upper trough is producing extensive cloud with thunderstorms off northeastern New South Wales and generating low clouds over the southeast. A low and associated trough is bringing cloud and thunderstorms over southwestern WA and western SA towards the Northern Territory interior. In the major centres, a possible shower in Darwin, partly cloudy in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, also in Hobart, Adelaide, Perth and Alice Springs. Cloudy in Canberra. Further afield, partly cloudy in Wellington, showers in Samoa and Tahiti. In Southeast Asia, thunder in Bangkok, Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, drizzle in Jakarta. Further north, cloud in Shanghai and Tokyo, fine in Seoul, partly cloudy in Hong Kong, rain in Hanoi. Heading west, fine in Baghdad, Beirut and Jerusalem, partly cloudy in Islamabad and Tehran. To Europe, fine in Athens, rain in Moscow, Stockholm and London, cloud in Rome, fine in Warsaw. In Africa, fine in Addis Ababa and Cairo, partly cloudy in Nairobi and Johannesburg, thunder in Lagos. In South America, rain in Bogota and Caracas, a few showers in Lima, rain in Rio de Janeiro, fine in Santiago. And for North America, partly cloudy in New York and Washington, fine in Denver, showers in Miami and also cloud in Toronto. Well, Australia's top employers for the LGBTQ+ community have been revealed, with a university the Employer of the Year. The 2020 Australian LGBTQ Inclusion Awards recognises leaders, individuals and networks that have made a significant impact on inclusion in their workplaces.
With reduced numbers and strict seating arrangements, it was a scaled-back celebration for the 10th annual LGBTQ Inclusion Awards. After being postponed in May due to the coronavirus pandemic, today's event saw record numbers of employers across the country recognised for their achievements.
For younger people coming into the workplace, it's important that they can see people like themselves.
Hosted by SBS presenter Ricardo Consalves, the winners were determined by the Australian Workplace Equality Index, which sets a comparative benchmark for employers. RMIT University again took out the title of Employer of the Year, while others were awarded for their individual efforts in driving change.
One of the major things we did was the raising of the rainbow flag outside police stations. We were one of the first jurisdictions, along with Queensland Police, to do that.
It means a lot because, we put in a whole lot of work during the year. It's a second job for a lot of us.
16 organisations were awarded gold employer status, including NAB, Woolworths and SBS. Cassandra Bain, SBS World News.
And recapping our top story now, US President Donald Trump has told a rally in Nevada the US would be in a major depression if he had followed the advice of scientists on coronavirus. More than 8.1 million Americans have now been infected with COVID-19, 380,000 in the past week alone. That's the world this Monday. If you missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can catch up on the SBS News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our app. Catalina Flores will be back with our next bulletin just after 10:20. From the team, I'm Darren Mara. Good night.